Yes, the wait is finally over. I've got the Mac Studio in-house. I've been testing it out for a little while now, roughly about 24 hours, so obviously this isn't going to be a full review, but today I want to give my initial impressions of just what I've noticed so far with this machine, because I already have a lot of thoughts, and I want to share them with you all. And before we start, I want to say, for all the new subscribers who showed up because of the previous Mac Studio video I made, where I just talked about why I was going to buy the machine, thank you guys so much. This has been probably one of the biggest bumps I've seen in the channel in a while. Hopefully we can continue that today with the Mac Studio, as well as, obviously, into the future by talking more about tech, anime, anything that interests me, and hopefully something that interests you. But without further ado, let's get into my first impressions of the Mac Studio. And no, it's actually not in this box, so don't worry, I wasn't throwing around the entire Mac Studio. Actually, on the topic of the box real quick, I do want to talk about the unboxing experience because I avoided the unboxing videos of this, and I also tried to skip over the parts of the review videos where people were unboxing them just because I want to experience it for myself for the first time, and, well, Apple didn't disappoint. The box was really cool. The handle on top I love because it's just a straight callback to the original PowerPC G4 Mac Mini. Those used to have a little carrying handle, and that means that if I move, because I keep my boxes, even though they are completely recyclable, I can use this as a means of transporting my Mac Studio to my new apartment whenever I move. So that's a really good plus. And in general, the box is just really well made. Apple's box engineers are top tier. You can pull the sides open and it makes it easier for you to lift the entire thing out. It had the power cord in there, it had the stickers. It had one sticker, actually, a black sticker, which I've never had a black Apple sticker from one of my own products, but I did get the black Apple stickers from the Mac Pro when a buddy of mine bought one and said that he was going to give me $3,000 worth of Apple stickers. And the thing that I was actually really impressed by, and after I discovered this, I realized that everybody else was commenting on it too, was the cushion that they put at the bottom. I'm not going to go into detail because everybody's talked about it, so if you've seen one video about it, you've seen them all, but it's a cushion at the bottom, so if somebody decides to huck your Mac Studio into the back of a truck for shipping, it's got a pad on the bottom made completely out of cardboard that can let it move a little without damaging the product. It's pretty clever. But moving away from talking about that box, it's time to talk about this box, and I just want to say right out of the gate, I've worked on PCs for many years, I've worked on Macs for many years, and I have never been able to hold a computer this powerful with one hand. It's kind of mind-blowing, and this isn't even the most powerful one, but it's very powerful nonetheless. There's so many things that I really like about this. The biggest one is the fact that because the footprint is the same, the fact that it's a 7.7 by 7.7 square, you can literally put this exactly where my Mac Mini used to be, or rather, I can put this exactly where my Mac Mini used to be. It fits perfectly. And having this same footprint is a huge benefit for my workflow because underneath of my Mac Mini was a dock and sort of an SSD enclosure all in one. It had USB in the front and an SSD enclosure inside, and it sat underneath the Mac Mini. And, well, because this is the exact same footprint as the Mac Mini, it sits right on top exactly the same. And if you want to learn more about that product, you can check it out in the video right over there. So when it comes to size, this thing is the exact same footprint as the Mac Mini, but it is quite a bit taller. This is actually about 2.5 Mac Minis tall. And I know this because I took my two Mac Minis and stacked them on top of each other next to this, and this was still a little bit taller. Looking around at the general design of the machine, at the front, the first thing that stood out to me was actually not the front I/O, because that was just sort of something that I was happy to see and glossed over. The first thing that stood out to me was the fact that this is actually a very large power indicator light. And I remember the days when Apple's power indicators and any light that came through the aluminum was so tiny that it was basically invisible as soon as the machine went to sleep. Anybody remember the breathe light on the old MacBooks? Kind of like that. So to see this little thing on the front where it is like noticeably visible where it is even when it's off, that's kind of different, but I guess it's not super uncommon for Apple's machines nowadays, so I don't know why I fixated on it so much, but just a little OCD thing for me. But yeah, aside from that, it does have front I/O, which is freaking awesome, and funnily enough, I've been so conditioned to Apple desktops not having front I/O that when I went to pair my trackpad and my keyboard, you can plug them in through Lightning, and the first thing I did was begin to reach around back with the cord to plug it in so that I could pair them, and then it clicked in my head that I didn't have to because there were ports on the front. Thank you, Johnny Ive, for getting us so conditioned to not having any easily accessible ports on our Mac products. It's about time that we finally have that. It's been a long time coming, and I'm glad to see it. Now, in my case, the front ports are just USB-C, and I say just USB-C like that's a bad thing, but these are still incredibly fast, and for the Thunderbolt ports, I don't have any Thunderbolt accessories that go in the front. Everything Thunderbolt that I use is around back anyway because it's driving a display or a permanent drive. So I didn't really need Thunderbolt up front anyway. And then next to it is the SD card reader. This is something that I'm actually very happy to see built directly into a Mac for one specific reason. The hub that I mentioned earlier does have two SD card slots in it, one for micro and one for full size, and I like that, and I still use the micro SD card slot if I use something like a GoPro, for example, but using those SD card slots built into the hub means that when I plug in any SD card, it shows up on the desktop like an external hard drive, not like an SD card. So the problem I've run into a few times is that I'll go to drag a file in a hurry and look for it once I unplugged my external drive I meant to copy it to and realize that I accidentally copied it to the SD card because it shows up like an external drive and not an SD card. But when you have a built-in SD card on the Mac, it shows up like an SD card. Or rather, when you have a built-in SD card reader on the Mac, it shows up like an SD card. So there's no confusing it because visually, they look different, which is so nice and such a minor detail that I just love. Now, moving around to the back of this thing, one of the first things that stood out to me was just the massive amount of cooling. And I knew that was a big thing for Apple with this design because of that M1 Ultra chip, but you get the same kind of cooling vents, at least, for the M1 Max, and apparently the same fans, but the coolers are different. I looked at a teardown, and apparently the one in the Ultra version is a copper heat system, whereas this is, I believe, aluminum. Either way, when I get to performance, I'll talk about why that's not a big deal, honestly. But yeah, the cooling on the back and the intake on the bottom, that was actually pretty impressive. You have this massive grill set around the bottom on this ring instead of the little plastic cap that the Mac Mini used to have. Now, of course, that does mean that the screws are hidden under this ring instead of popping the bottom off and looking at the screws, but I'm not taking this thing apart. If you want to, go right ahead. Everybody was complaining about the fact that the SSDs were removable but not upgradable. If you want to tear into that, you go right ahead. I don't care. I'll talk more about that in the full review, but for now, I'm not going to open it. In fact, I probably never will open this, and the fact that they sealed it up for me is fine. You can complain about it if you want. Anyway, I got a little off topic there. The cooling is very impressive, and during all of my use cases, this is very clearly working. I have not heard this thing once. And when I try to listen for it, the most I can hear is a very quiet whoosh of air, and it doesn't change. No matter how much I've thrown at it, it does not change. In fact, this thing has not gotten hot to the touch, and I'm guessing that's because this entire top section where you see these holes is just for cooling. Anyway, moving away from cooling, the other things on the back of this computer that I was very excited about included the 4 Thunderbolt ports, which is just awesome. I don't have 4 Thunderbolt accessories to plug into this thing. In fact, I have 1 Thunderbolt accessory plugged into this thing. I have the hub, and then I have that hub also talking to a screen. So in total, I'm using 2 ports. That's it. I have 2 left. So I always feel like it's better to have ports on tap than to be tapped for ports. In this case, you have ports on tap. When it came to the Mac Mini, I was tapped for ports. I used every port on the back of that thing except for the headphone jack. But that's just because I don't use the built-in DAC. I use my own external one, which is also plugged in through a USB connection, thus showing how tapped for ports I was. Anyway, moving on from the Thunderbolt ports, we do have a built-in 10 gigabit Ethernet connection, which is freaking awesome. And this is standard. This isn't an upgrade like it was on the Mac Mini. 10 gigabit Ethernet standard. And my network can handle 10 gigabit Ethernet. And so I have never seen data transfer rates on my network this fast. It is incredible to see a file get transferred from point A to point B as fast as the hard drive on my NAS can take it. It's so cool to see. Another really cool thing that I kind of fixated on in my first video about the Mac Studio is this really beefy Mickey Mouse looking power cord. Hopefully I can call it Mickey Mouse without Disney coming down on me. Actually, before I talk about the Mac Studio power cord, I'll show you this. This is the Mac Mini power cord, and the Mac Mini literally does not need that much power. In fact, the same chip that's in the Mac Mini is also what's in my iPad, and that's running on a battery. So I understand why the cord's not super beefy. It's this little 2-prong non-polarized connector, 2 prongs on the other end. It's just a little rubberized thing, nothing too special. It's kind of chintzy, but it's also the cheapest Mac you can buy, so I'm not complaining. But then we get this big guy, and this thing is monstrous. So you have a really, really big 3-prong cable right up at the front, grounded 3-prong on the other end, a nice thick gauge cable, and it's braided, which is so cool. This is super nice. It's one of the nicest power cables I own. I'm really glad that they beefed up the power delivery for this thing and gave you a power cord to match that improved power delivery. It's much appreciated. It's such a small thing, but I love it. Anyway, moving down from this power cord that I was super fanboying over for no particular reason, we have two USB-A ports. Now, I'm a little weird when it comes to my port selection preferences, especially when it comes to laptops, because on a laptop, I really don't mind if it doesn't have USB-A. And the reason why I don't mind is because, especially in the case of the MacBook Pros, it's all Thunderbolt. So I can convert those into anything I want, and it means the laptop can be thinner, lighter, and at the end of the day, ultimately more portable. So not having a big USB-A port, which is generally a single type, single purpose connector, for the benefit of having one connector that can be converted to anything is totally fine by me. However, when you have a desktop like this, where it's going to be sitting in one place and basically living there for its entire life, I prefer to have more ports. And that's because I have things that, when I'm putting a desktop setup together, will never move. And wasting an adapter on them because I don't have the kind of port they need right out of the gate kind of irritates me. So on a laptop, no USB-A, I don't care. It's totally fine. You're putting a USB-C connector on there that can be converted to anything. Totally fine by me. You're at least putting a multifunctional port on there. But on a desktop, I don't want to waste a converter just to have one or two things that require a specific port like USB. And this fits that bill perfectly. I only need two USB ports anyway, and well, this has two USB ports, so freaking awesome. Alongside that, you have the HDMI connector. The HDMI connector is fantastic, and I use it for one of my displays, and then I have another connector run through USB-C to my display, so that's fine. Then you have the audio jack. I don't use it. I tried it, and my problem with Apple's current pro-level audio jacks isn't the high impedance. That is actually really nice. It can drive some of the higher impedance headphones that I have, which means that it would be great for things like certain desktop speakers, but the actual DAC they use is not the best quality in my opinion. It gets loud if you have low impedance headphones, and the higher impedance headphones you have, the more volume you can get out of them with this jack, but the quality isn't quite there. I prefer to use my Presonus system because that gives me better quality audio while still being able to drive a higher impedance headphone set. But it's there if you need it. I'm not going to say it's bad, I'm not going to say it's good, it's just not to my preference. It gets loud enough with high impedance, but it doesn't sound, in my tastes, good enough to justify it as a pro headset system. And with all that said, that pretty much wraps up the external portion of the machine, the design, the whole deal. The only other thing I'll add is that this thing is pretty chunky, even for its size. It is dense. Like, you guys have probably seen my other videos where I'm coming from this is the Mac Mini, and this thing weighs like nothing. I can chuck this around. I have no concerns about it. It's like maybe 3 pounds. I'm actually not sure what the exact weight is on this. This guy is about 5.6 pounds, if I remember correctly, and the Ultra version is even heavier, so it is dense. It's kind of like when they went from the original Xbox One to the Xbox One S, and it felt like all the weight of the Xbox One was condensed into the One S size. That's what this feels like. It's wild. And with that being said, since we're going to move on to performance and software, I'm going to put this down now because I don't need more of an arm workout. But now that we got all the external stuff out of the way with the design and the ports, let's talk about the performance, because I bought the very base model of this machine. So here are the specs. I have the model with the M1 Max 24-core GPU, so I bought the base GPU version of the chip. I also have 32 gigabytes of RAM, which is fantastic that that's standard. I love the fact that that's standard, because having 16 gigabytes of RAM was fine on the Mini, but finally opening up to 32 gigs again, it's so nice. I had 32 gigs on my last machine, and it was fine, and unified memory was sort of that bridge for performance, but having that wide open 32 gigabyte pasture to run around in is so much better. For the SSD, I have 512 gigabytes of storage, and when I said that I was going to be doing that in my previous video, that was the most commented about thing underneath that video. There were obviously other comments, but the most commented thing about my choice in what machine I was getting was the storage, whether it be somebody saying they were going to buy the same thing but bump the storage up, or telling me that I should bump the storage up. It was commented about a lot. And I did a video a little while ago talking about how I make my videos and my setup, which you can check out right over there. But I talked about how all of the drives that I use for editing are external, and are still more than fast enough for the footage that I use. And so the way I use my internal storage on these computers is very different from, I think, what a lot of people are assuming. A lot of YouTubers are using really high bitrate footage, and I have used high bitrate footage once in a while, and when I do have to use that, I will put it on an internal SSD or a Thunderbolt SSD, because either of those is fast enough. But generally, when I have internal storage on a machine, that is exclusively for dedicated, necessary files that have to be on the boot volume, as well as applications that I use for everything. Applications, specific files that I can't put on an external drive. That is it. There's nothing else that goes on those. And because of that, I still have over 300 gigabytes free on this computer. So yes, I'm sure there's other people who like to put everything on the main machine, and that's fine. You do you, but in my case, I have external drives that are still more than fast enough to run the footage I use, and in the case that I need more storage or more data rate, I can use my Thunderbolt drives. Simple as that. Anyway, moving on from that, with those specs, I was definitely anticipating quite a bump, because this isn't like the videos where I was watching people go from the M1 to the M1 Pro and then the M1 Max. I'm making the jump from the M1 to the M1 Max and completely skipping the Pro, and holy crap. Now, obviously, I'm going to save a lot of the more in-depth stuff and a lot of the really, really numbers-oriented stuff for the full review, because, well, I haven't run those tests yet. I have barely had this thing for over 24 hours, so I haven't done a lot with it. But one of the things that I have done is throw my most extreme test at it. And I use this test to sort of figure out how my most extreme workflow would go on my new machine. I've done it with my MacBook Pro before I got rid of that piece of garbage. I did it with my Mac Mini, and now I've done it with my Mac Studio. And I've actually used this test for quite a few of my Macs because I've had clients send me raw, red 8K footage. And obviously I can't use client footage, so the footage that I use in this test is demo footage pulled from Red's website, but I've used it on, well, my most recent 3 Macs that I've used as my main editing machines. That includes the 2019 MacBook Pro with the i9, the M1 Mac Mini, and this new Mac Studio. Also, just for shits and giggles, I ran it on the 8 gigabytes of RAM version of the M1 Mac Mini, as well as the 16 gig version, just to get a range. But this is going to be the only numbers thing here, and it's 1 minute because the math is pretty easy, but let's just talk about that real quick, and then we'll move on to everything else. So for the 2019 MacBook Pro with the Core i9, now keep in mind this is running Big Sur. I never got it up to Monterey before I got rid of it, but with that software on the older version of Final Cut, the best number that I ever got out of this 1 minute render test was 8 minutes and 26 seconds. Not bad, but it's literally 7 minutes longer than it is to watch the clip play, and when you went to play it on the timeline, it just stuttered. That was not a great experience. Even in better performance, you just had to render it or you weren't going to play it back. Moving on to the 8 gigabyte Mac Mini, this thing actually kind of killed. It cranked this out in 5 minutes and 27 seconds. That's pretty impressive. I was really surprised that a Mac Mini like that with only 8 gigabytes of RAM was able to crank that out, though it did fill the RAM and the GPU was slammed, so keep that in mind. Now, when it comes to the 16 gigabyte version of the Mac Mini, that cranked this test video out in 4 minutes and 51 seconds. So it didn't quite make a huge difference having that extra memory, because once the memory's full, everything grinds to a halt anyway. But playback was also smooth in better performance mode, so I can't really complain. Now for the Mac Studio with the weaker GPU. And this thing cranked the video out in 2 minutes and 9 seconds. Damn. Just a minute over what it would take to watch this clip in real time. That is crazy, especially when you compare it to what the MacBook Pro was doing. That is really impressive. And when it comes to playback, you could actually play certain compressions of the red raw footage I was using in better quality mode instead of better performance mode. But between the transitions and the varying compressions from the demo footage, it was usually best to just play it in better performance mode. So in terms of cranking out the most extreme instance of what I'll ever do on this computer, I was genuinely impressed. But that really isn't something I do too often. So that means that the extra horsepower that I gained with this computer is going to pay dividends in terms of the regular videos I make. In fact, I've already done one video so far with this new Mac Studio. It was the one that came out on Wednesday. It was my thoughts on Shikimori Isn't Just a Cutie, an anime video. So if you're not really into anime, you don't have to watch it. But it was a 7-minute video, and it spit the damn thing out in 3 minutes. The Mac Mini was impressive because it was spitting out 7-minute videos in like 6, maybe 5 minutes. 3 minutes. And I say 3 minutes because I'm rounding up. It was 2 minutes and 57 seconds. I'm going to be making a lot more videos in a lot less time. It's awesome. But in regards to how quickly I can crank out videos, this is something MKBHD said in his video, and I completely agree. This is a tool. That means that if you know how to use the tool, it is going to improve your workflow dramatically. That means that if you are good, you can still be good, but now you can do it faster. But if you suck, you're not going to be better. You're just going to be faster, and you're still going to suck. So in my instance, this is going to dramatically improve my general workflow. And even just booting the thing up and navigating around the operating system, I immediately noticed a huge difference. This thing flies. And that's probably because of the extra RAM and the fact that these SSDs can crank out over 5 gigabytes per second of read-write, which for apps is crazy. And I thought that the Mac Mini was incredible. The Mac Mini, when I did my transfer in the Migration Assistant, was the limiter. It was going as fast as the SSDs in the Mac Mini could go, and I managed to move my entire Mac Mini, migrated the whole thing over to the new Mac Studio in 15 minutes. And that was well into the 200 gigabytes of data range. That is amazing. Overall, I have a lot more stuff to talk about when I get more experience behind the keyboard of this computer, but as it stands right now, I can tell already that this is going to dramatically improve how I make my videos. I already had a higher ceiling moving from my i9 MacBook Pro to the M1 Mac Mini, and I reached that ceiling real fast. And the ceiling that's now been raised by this Mac Studio is so high that it's going to be a while before I come anywhere close to reaching it. And in general, it just means that I don't have to stress about sitting and waiting for a client's video to crank out overnight. I can potentially sit and watch a video crank out because of how quickly this renders. All of my current videos are now able to be cranked out in under real time by a huge amount, and the most extreme version was only a minute over real time, which sounds like a lot when you're talking about 1 minute to 2 minutes, but when it comes to the kind of footage it was cranking out in 2 minutes, sign me up. I want to keep this thing. I am going to keep this thing. This is my new main machine. I'm keeping the Mac Mini as a server, and I'm selling the other one to my parents, but this is my new main machine. This guy here, this is it. This is my new main machine. I am so pumped to really start diving in and doing more work with it. I don't get excited about doing work too often unless it's this kind of stuff, and this really gets me excited. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you guys want to check out some more information about this machine, you can follow the link down below. I'm going to link this if it's available on Amazon. It's my affiliate link. You can follow that. It helps me out if you really want to. But aside from that, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, found it useful. There's going to be more. There's going to be a lot more. I'm working on a sponsorship. I'm working on getting a dock in to test out, a Thunderbolt dock. So hopefully that deal will come around pretty soon. Otherwise, make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment. What do you guys think? You guys excited for more content? I'm excited to make more content, and that's it. I'll see you guys in the next video. I'm like super stoked to plug this thing in, so I'm gonna go do that. Have a good one.